Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. We will get started here in just a moment. We're going to allow for our task force members to join and community members to join with us as well. So just give us just a moment here and we'll get started about 5 minutes after. Hey, Sadie.
Hi.
It's good to see you. Good to hear your voice. Ajamel, good to see you. So like I said, we'll give folks just a few minutes here to join. We'll give the task force members a few minutes here to join and community members some time to join. And then we'll get started here about 5 minutes after the turn of the half hour. Hey, Michael.
Hello.
Good to see you.
One of our colleagues is looking beardless, I see.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
You look younger like I would if I got rid of mine too.
Michael, I do the opposite effect. I put a few hair whiskers on my face so I look a little bit older.
Yeah, it's that time of the year where it just is unreasonably hot all the time. So anything to help with that.
Yep. Completely understand that. Completely understand that. Looks like we have a few attendees here from the community. Thank you, community members, for joining us tonight for our community session. We're excited to have you here. We're going to get started here in just about a minute or so. We're going to give task force members a few more minutes to join and any other community members that would like to be a part of this conversation as well. So hang tight and we'll get things started in just a moment. All right, Cedric, the man of the hour. Glad you're here with us.
Thank you.
Your tech issues taken care of?
I hope so. Had to go to another computer, get off the laptop.
It happens to the best of us. Kim Minori, thank you for joining us, my friend. We'll let you all get settled and we'll get started here in about 60 seconds. All righty. As task force members come, we'll introduce them, and community members, thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to our third installment community listening session that we have here. It is June 28th, and we're excited to be here with you also. This is the third Reimagining Public Safety community listening session, and we're excited to have you all with us. Today, we have an action-packed agenda. We're going to do some introductions from our task force members. We'll hear from our city officials, and then we will have a comprehensive report out from each of the respective subcommittees. And then from there, we're going to turn it over to you, the community, so that we can have great dialogue back and forth please utilize the chat box function if you would like to submit questions there, or if you would like to submit questions verbally. Raise your hand, identify that, and we will promote you so that you can have access to do so. But you get to meet the task members again, then we'll have comprehensive report out from each of our subcommittees, and then we will have a great dialogue back and forth. So thank you all for joining us. We deeply appreciate you. Today, we are here because the charge of this task force, it was formed by the City Council and shepherded by a steering committee consisting of city staff with the support of Link Strategic Partners and Experian Advisory, and driven by the task force members themselves. The work of the task force has been informed by the extensive input of our community members, nonprofit leaders, local business owners, educators, local and state representatives, national public safety experts, advocates, and more. This was a comprehensive and inclusive effort designed to make sure our community is a safer, more equitable, and more livable community that serves all of the residents in Takoma Park. So we're grateful for the participation of the task force, the community, and elected leaders. And it is at this point in time where I am going to turn it over to our dear Councilwoman Searcy, to provide some remarks. Councilwoman, thank you.
Great. I hope everyone can hear me. Perfect. Awesome. Well, this is, I want to thank the task force. I know that you all have put in a number of hours of not only during the meeting times, but after hours, reading materials, coming up with your recommendations. And so today, I don't want to belabor the point because today's meeting is not about me. Today's meeting is an opportunity for the task force to communicate its draft recommendations to the public and for the public to have an opportunity to provide feedback in real time. So again, I just want to thank the task force and want to thank Link for all of the work that you all have done to get us this far, and definitely look forward to listening in on the conversation that transpires tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. We appreciate your remarks and grateful for you. At this point in time, we're going to take a few moments to introduce the task force members that are here with us. I'm going to go into order of how you appear on my screen. So I'm not playing favorites at all, although I care about all of you dearly, but not playing favorites here. And we're going to start with Cedric and then go to Ajamel. So Cedric, you're up.
I'm Cedric Boatman. I am the district supervisor for security for Montgomery County Public Schools, Maryland.
Thank you. Ajamel, then Adam.
Ajmal Qureshi, Ward 3, civil rights lawyer.
Adam, then Michael.
Adam Braskich, Ward 6. I'm a prosecutor by day and a former police officer.
Michael, then Kiminori.
Michael Rubin, Ward 2, work for Impact Silver Spring and represent Impact on the Silver Spring Justice Coalition.
Wonderful. Kiminori, then Jimana.
Kiminori Nakamura, Ward 6, assistant research professor at University of Maryland, criminology.
Thank you. Jimana, then Sadie.
Janana Musa, I'm a 20-year resident of Ward 6. I work for the National Association, I can't even say where I work, the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I've done a lot of work on policing and in various funds.
Yeah, your excuse is almost 7 o'clock tonight after a long day. You're good on a Monday too, so you're.
No, I have to apologize ahead of time, but I've had a cold, so my head is not as clear as it could be.
We hope that you do. Sadie, and then we're going to do a quick round of introductions from the facilitator. So Sadie, then Cordell.
I'm Sadie. I'm from Ward 3, and I'm a student, and I've been doing some unarmed public safety alternatives, I guess, at UNC Chapel Hill this year.
Cordell Carter from Expectant Advisory, one of the facilitators.
And I got the name wrong earlier, Cordell, so I appreciate you correcting that. Cordell, then Michael.
Michael Aiken with Link Strategic Partners. You'll see a number of folks who aren't on camera. They're note takers with Link Strategic Partners who've been an integral part of getting the subcommittees and documented through their work, and they'll be with us tonight as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jamal to introduce himself and then walk us through the timeline.
Awesome. Thank you, Jevin. My name is Jamal Holtz, co-facilitator with Link Strategic Partners. So to jump in on the timeline, Jacqueline's going to share her screen with the slides for today, so we can do a quick walk through the timeline of where we are currently in the process.
Well, the slides are coming up. Just to remind everyone, again, you can use the chat feature, the Q&A box, or the hand raise function, which you can access in the bottom of your Zoom screen. And as we go forward, we will take comments equally from any format. So engage with us however you're most comfortable. Go ahead, Jamal.
That is correct. So as you all see here is the timeline that we've been working on for the past few months since January. Right now, we're currently in the phase where we're hosting one of our a community meeting, really to gauge you all's feedback on the draft recommendations that the task force and the subcommittees have put together, and to really give you all an opportunity to weigh in. This is the third out of two already completed community meetings throughout this process. So looking forward full steam ahead to really finalize this report and get you all's feedback tonight. Next slide, please. Awesome. So here, just to kind of review the schedule and where we are, on June 28th, we had a community meeting to provide feedback on our recommendations, which is tonight. So moving forward, we'll take the feedback and what we heard from tonight and kind of spend some time overnight meshing the feedback together with the recommendations that we put out in draft format on the website. And we'll meet as a task force tomorrow to incorporate that feedback and start moving towards the stage of finalizing a report. And then by July 6th, we'll submit the report to the city council. So we'll spend the next 24 hours is really critical as we get you all's feedback, but also take it back to the task force tomorrow to really finalize some of that feedback and move the report into final stages. And then on July 13th, there will be a city council working session to talk through the recommendations in the report. Next slide, please. So as Michael mentioned, there's been many opportunities and engagement entry points for you all to submit public comment, feedback, but also tonight for you to come off camera or come off mute or use the chat as an opportunity to share feedback. But however, the public comment form is still open. So if you don't get an opportunity to share your feedback tonight in the Zoom room, feel free to use the link. Sorry, I only sent that. Feel free to use the link in the chat that you can share with the broader community, or if you don't have time to stay on the call for too long, just drop any of the feedback you have into that public comment form. Next slide, please. So before we jump in, I'll toss it over to my colleague Michael to kind of give an update on the subcommittees and the report out on what we've been working on over the past few months. So,
Yeah, and I'll keep this super brief, just some framing for those who might be tuning into the process at this point or those who followed it throughout. A lot of the work has been done up to this point at the subcommittee level, extensive review of documents and reports and data and subject matter experts. So a lot of the work was done at the subcommittee level. Subcommittee members came up with recommendations at the subcommittee level. What you saw in the discussion draft that was posted, and we'll share a link to it in the chat box right now, is a compilation of those recommendations. These are not the final recommendations. Council has not seen these yet. These are the really great and diligent work of the subcommittees being compiled into one document for public feedback tonight. And then moving forward, we will, as a task force, work to figure out what the final recommendations look like. There were 3 task force subcommittees: community quality of life, alternative methods and responses, and community engagement and transparency, that you will hear from next. Next slide, please. There were 3 overarching kind of questions the task force has kept in mind throughout its work together. What are we trying to solve for? What solutions can we offer? And then how will how will implementation and evaluation work after the time of the task force is done? Some recommendations, as you see these, are coming from, here's a specific thing that we can and should and must do better in Takoma Park. Others are recommendations that build upon what Takoma Park does well. And while still others say, there's a best in class, and we in Takoma Park want to be best in class, so let's drive towards that. So there's a variety of recommendations that cover all of those different topics. Next slide, please. the very last thing here is the discussion draft, as I said, represents the work of the task force to this point. The task force has worked on this night and day, including over the weekend. These will continue to evolve, and they will evolve with your feedback. So we'd like as much specific feedback or general comments as you have tonight for us to continue the work of the task force. The recommendations will next go to City Council. When they do, the council will work with city staff, with task force members and the public to continue, evaluate, discuss, and decide how to move forward. So just to give you a sense of where we are in that process. And now, Cordell, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Michael. I come from the, I'm sorry, community. This is not my committee, I'm alternatives. We can click through. There we are. Yes, the subcommittee on alternative methods and responses. And we were looking at emergency, non-emergency calls, issues related to mental health, a variety of issues. We have an incredibly interesting committee. It's intergenerational as well as multidisciplinary. We have Michael Rubin, G-Day, Sadie, who represents our millennials, and Cedric Boltman, who is our leader and also a former law enforcement officer and current security officer for the entire district of Montgomery County Public Schools. So it's led to very robust discussions. Next slide. So here are some, I'm sorry, at this point, am I gonna have Cedric speak or no?
Yeah.
Yes, I will call Cedric now. I wanna get into this. Well, this is his spot. So Cedric, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Cordell. First of all, I'd like to thank Cordell Carter for, he was our facilitator real quick, and I'll be brief, but he kept us on task and he allowed us to be creative. So I thank him for that. And I thank the people on the committee with me, and that was Michael, JD, and Sadie. And I thank them, especially last week. They really had to take a deep dive into this, and I had to work on special duty at night a couple of days last week when they had to do this. And Sadie picked up the gauntlet and got everybody moving. And I really appreciate Michael, Sadie, and JD's work on this. And it's been a lot of fun. The subcommittee on alternative methods and responses, what we came up with in policing was one of the following bullet points: creating of community assistant office. That was one of the things. The other was a dispatch and a referral portion of that. Emergency call center, 311 operation resource response directed to non-law enforcement. Then also coordination of police response across multiple jurisdictions. We also came up with recommendations, community/policing relationships and partnerships, and community-oriented policing service with the acronym COPS. And then we moved on to community education. And under community education, we came up with recognizing the historical speaking there has been as a transfer of youth of color from the educational system to the criminal justice system. To eliminate that pipeline, we recommend the following. You can see them in bullet points when they go over. And then we came up with some other things. We looked at data, and one of the data bullet points we were going to respond to was this, along with schools, the following data is requested in order to ensure that the suggestions made in the schooling section of the community education section are bearing fruit. That means they're moving forward and they're actually growing to some of the things that we're recommending. And dispatch data to also to segregate by officer initiation or versus community initiation, as well as by ward, and qualifying incidents where officers attempt to use and successfully use de-escalation techniques. And then we looked at implementation and refinement of the task force. And we thought about this coming down the home stretch, given the compressed time and framework that we had in time, the task force to analyze data and develop recommendations. We think it is important or imperative to ensure some kind of community standing committee monitoring progress in implementing these recommendations, and also develop new recommendations after the review of further practices. And last but not least, one of the things is really going to be crucial, I think, with the police department also, is ensure that officers can live in Takoma Park and become integrated in the community. That's going to help tremendously for them to know the community that they're going to serve. And these are some of the recommendations that the Alternative Methods and Response Committee are offering to the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cedric. That is really helpful. And for those watching, we just dropped in the chat box the list of the full recommendations. They are 17 pages long, which is why we're giving the high-level overview here, just for those who might not have had a chance to get through all 17 pages, so you know what section of the report to look at. Mr. Carter, anything else from your group, sir?
It's fantastic. I just want to echo my thanks to the people that participated in this particular process. This is real public service. So I just want to thank you all.
Got it. We're going to go to Jevon's group next, which was the Community Quality of Life group. And so Subcommittee 1, who would like to take the report out?
And before we do that, I'm going to introduce Ajamel to read out the report, but we dropped in the chat. We have robust 17 pages of recommendations, and we'll begin tonight. We want to make sure that you to get a deep understanding of where we are. We have about 5 minutes per group, and so folks really looking forward to this robust discussion. And Ajamel, you ready?
Hey everybody, Ajamel Qureshi. Is those of y'all who know me, they'll know that the last thing I want is to subject people to hearing my voice for any longer than they have to. You have the recommendations that the Community Quality of Life group put forward, so I'm not going to walk you through those. I'll just give you a couple of thoughts on what we were thinking behind them. There really were 3 main motivations that led to almost all of the recommendations that you see in there. Number one, we wanted to reduce the potential for violence, specifically state violence or state sanctioned violence, which meant creating new branches that will respond to calls for help from Takoma Park residents. So you'll see at least 2, maybe 3 recommendations in there aimed at reducing the potential for the use of force by involving mental health workers, social service workers, and others who have specific training, who have the ability and training to deal with situations that oftentimes result in violence, but don't need to result in violence. That's thought number one. Thought number 2 is reducing criminalization. A number of the recommendations are calling for the elimination of certain policies that unnecessarily criminalize certain actions. One of the things that we saw over and over again in the speakers that we met with, as well as the policies that we reviewed, was the unnecessary involvement of disproportionate numbers of Black and brown people in the criminal justice system. And so we sought to eliminate or reduce the potential for that. And then the third thing you'll see in our recommendations is efforts to address the root causes of problems, including racial and socioeconomic disparities. So a number of the recommendations aim to take account for the different socioeconomic backgrounds that individuals have when they interact with the criminal justice system, and to reduce the impact of those disparities. Look forward to your feedback on the recommendations. I've tried to be short, and thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thank you. Jamal, can I turn it over to you and your group, please?
Yes, thank you, Michael. So my group, Community Engagement and Transparency. So before I turn it over to Adam to give an overview of the recommendations that came out of our group, because the slides are changing. So I'll just give a quick overview of the community engagement. The subcommittee really evaluated practices and policies related to sharing data and budget information among the public, as well as efforts to engage community partners and public safety efforts. Additionally, the subcommittee reviewed existing efforts and considered new approaches to recruiting and retaining public safety professionals. So I'll turn it over to Adam to give an overview of the recommendations. Next slide.
Right, thanks, Jamal. So I'll try to follow Ajmal's lead and just not read to you the bullet points that are in the document that you all have, but explain what was really the motivation behind a lot of the recommendations. And what we're trying to accomplish here is greater transparency, greater oversight of the police department, and better community engagement. So the first recommendation that you'll see is that we want to have the city try to be proactive in making records publicly available. There are police disciplinary records that folks can request through the Maryland Public Information Act. Our hope is that the city will follow this House Bill 183, which is kind of an aspirational bill that encourages cities to develop a policy of proactive disclosure. So if we can put complaints that are filed by citizens online, and the police reports, once the investigation and the adjudication of the complaints are over, online for people to see how the police department handled those complaints, then we'll have greater transparency, and citizens will be able to see if there are any problems, either in the conduct of the officers that's the subject of the complaints, or just in the handling of the complaints. And we, to be clear, don't have any particular reason to believe that there are any problems, but right now it's kind of a black box. So our hope is that once there's greater transparency, if there are any problems, we can develop recommendations to address those. And if there are not, then the public's trust in the police department will be that much greater for it. So the next big recommendation has to do with oversight. And I think most larger police departments have some sort of civilian oversight mechanism. And the question for us is what to do about Takoma Park, which is unique in that it has its own full service police department within a county that largely depends just on the county department. I think there are some departments that perform some functions, but it's really, I think Takoma Park might be the only one that handles all crimes from traffic enforcement through homicide. And so the question is what to do about our town when a lot of the police reform is happening at the state level and at the county level. So there are two different models for consideration in our document, one of which is the auditor that can kind of operate at the macro level and keep an eye on the police department and make recommendations about policies and practices and training. And another model, which would be a civilian review board, would involve citizens actually getting actively engaged with the complaints that citizens file, although that we're learning is pretty similar to the very progressive reforms that the state legislature has passed. So we're trying to figure out whether there's a way to balance those without duplicating too many of the same oversight mechanisms. We also have a number of reforms on body-worn camera policy. I won't go through them one by one, but the idea is, again, greater transparency. A number of cities have policies that after serious incidents like an in-custody death or a serious use of force, they will make the body camera footage public. The District of Columbia has a policy along those lines. So we have recommended something similar and also tried to expand the ways in which body camera footage will make sure that it records every part of an encounter, even if there's a little lapse in hitting the record button. We have another recommendation about trying to improve the avenues of communication between the community and the police force, the idea being to channel citizens' concerns and get the recommendations to the police department. And this could involve kind of reimagining the Chiefs Advisory Board or creating liaisons from different geographic groups and the interest groups that can channel their feedback to the department. And lastly, well, second to last, we want to improve the online procedures and the online experience that citizens have when they go to the Takoma Park website and try to figure out what is going on with their department and their city government more largely. And kudos to the police department and Chief Duvall because during the task force. They gave us a very robust presentation on traffic stop data and arrest data. And I think their goal was to make that public, and we just want to encourage them to showcase that work and then respond to any citizen concerns about anything that's missing and fill that out. But the idea would be to have a very interactive portal online so people can see exactly where police resources are going and the sort of enforcement that's taking place. And lastly, we just are echoing some of the recommendations of other groups about kind of de-emphasizing the minor forms of enforcement and taking different functions that are not necessarily related to actual enforcement of criminal law and perhaps moving them to like a neighborhood services organization or department within the city government, which I think another group recommended. So that's a high level, not as brief as I wanted summary for group 3, but we're here to answer any questions you might have.
Got it. Thank you so much, Adam. Jamal, anything else you want to add from your group? Or are we all set?
No, I think we're all set. As Adam mentioned with the citizen review piece, there's still currently active draft discussion around that. So as the group get feedback from you all tonight, but also figure out some of the minute pieces to the law, we'll move to a final recommendation around the model in which the group want to move forward with around the citizen review.
Could I just add quickly, just thanks to Adam for covering that. Jamal has been great at keeping our group moving, as we are detailed people who do who can go down lots of rabbit holes. But in the interest of not taking up too much time with this, I've really appreciated, and I want people to know just literally how much sort of time and research and energy has gone into this. At least I know for my subcommittee, the folks that I've been exchanging messages with, it's been a lot of work and really deep thought in it. So super open for feedback, but also just want to appreciate the folks that I got to serve with, and Jamal for keeping us all moving.
Thank you so much. So that is it for the report out. The entire rest of this meeting is public comment. So you've got in your chat, you've got the full list of 17 discussion draft recommendations. We're going to take the screen share down now so we can see each other. If you'd like to jump in, please use the raise hand feature. We can bring you on screen if you want to interact with video on, or you can do it through audio, or you can do it through chat or Q&A. So whatever is most comfortable for you. We'd like to know, what do you like? What don't you like? What did we miss? Any questions for the task force members? We'd like this to be a real dialogue. I'm looking at the attendees list here. So just go ahead anytime you've got a question or a comment, and we will make space for it. Perfect. We're going to start with Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, thank you. It's not easy to be the first one to jump in. We will promote you to a panelist, and you can choose if you'd like your screen on or not. Jacqueline, let me know when we have Elizabeth.
She is joining now.
Perfect. Go ahead, Elizabeth, whenever you're ready.
All right, well, actually, even though I jumped in to be the first, I don't actually have all my notes ready, but we're just going to go ahead. I wanted to thank the Public Safety Task Force members for the diligent work you've done over the past few months. It's a big project. My name is Elizabeth Wallace. I've lived in Ward 1 for over 25 years. This report came out Friday, June 25th. It's only 3 days later. I don't think the public's been able to listen in on we haven't been able to listen in on the subcommittee meetings, and it's really too soon for the public to digest it and give good comments, I think. I mean, I'm not even sure how many people are watching now. I want to bring up one first thing as I want to say is that the task force says you're supposed to answer 3 questions. The first one is the one I'm going to address. What are we trying to solve for here in Takoma Park now? What are our most pressing problems? Not the nation's, ours. So what I don't see in this report is the data to show that X number of problems are happening. They're happening in this part of the city. There are these types of crimes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if these solutions are the right ones for Takoma Park or the ones that we should implement now, first, immediately. Which one should we phase in over time? Most crimes in Takoma Park, from what I've seen, are committed by persons from outside the community, except perhaps domestic violence. I don't see that addressed here at all. I know Michael brought it up a few times. I've heard him in different meetings, and that made me hopeful that it's going to be showing up here, but I don't see it. Takoma Park residents are getting involved if they're getting involved in the criminal justice system outside the city, which of these solutions help address the root causes of their situations? I think some of the community quality of life problems, solutions could do that, but I don't know. I don't know how much they are. But at a recent and transparent meeting at the National Law Enforcement Museum, it was mentioned that police departments nationwide have a problem with incompatible systems. So it's hard to get at the data you really want quickly. And I think that was the problem here in Takoma Park, because it seemed to take a long time to get a lot of the data. That when I ran this small business, I had access to so much data quickly. I didn't have to wait months for it. I couldn't run a business without that data on a daily basis. So, but at first I thought it was Takoma Park's problem, but then when I went to the Law Museum, they said a lot of organizations have that. So do we need a custom program for Takoma Park to have the kind of data that we need? Or can we have a programmer fix the programs that we have so that we can make sure that we're getting the data that you want and easy and quick reports? Also, regarding oversight, the Maryland House Bill 1016 from 2016, our chief was given the power to appoint 2 non-voting members to the review board, but that's not happened to my knowledge yet. So in the meantime, before your suggestions can be implemented, perhaps he can do that. That bill also gave the chief the power to create a mediation solution for complaints that did not involve use of force. He said he offers that, but it's important to check if that complies with the Maryland Police and Correctional Training Commission guidelines that were set up years ago. By the way, in case I get cut off, I want to say that I support everything that Wayne Sherwood said in his letter to you, and I will send mine in separately. But I was at a previous public comment session and posted multiple comments in the chat, but I don't think any of my concerns show up in these recommendations. One of my reason why I got interested in police accountability was this task force should have been started years ago. When I was up here in front of the city council talking about crimes committed by Takoma Park officers off duty. I put those in the last comment and I got no response. Like Travis Ayla, road rage with a gun, or his accident which killed 3 people for which he paid $500 fine and the city was sued. Like Mueller, who was recently pled guilty to 3 counts of sexual offense in 4th degree. His lawyer is a former Takoma Park police officer who was also involved in a shooting, but the victim ran across Eastern Avenue, so the police investigated it. So it's not maybe in our records. I have so many things to say, but I don't know how many people are there, so I'm going to stop now. But I just want to say that I'm going to write a letter. I'm going to tell you what my concerns are. I want to see data, and I want to see that data. I want your solution. I would like to see your suggestions be supported by really good data. And if it takes longer to get the data, it takes longer. I'm not saying these suggestions are worthless. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that, if I'm a business person, if I'm going to buy something from my company, I want to show that I need a new copier. Okay. I need the data to prove that. Period. It's not here for me as a resident. And maybe that's just in the way the report was written. Maybe you've got the data. Maybe it has to be rewritten. But now I'm going to stop because I could go on. Thank you for doing the work you did. We do still have a long way to go. And I'm glad you suggested that some form of this group should continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I know you said I have to get a couple of things in case I get cut off. We're not cutting anyone off. This is a public meeting, so I want to make sure your issues are all raised.
Oh, the mayor usually cuts me off after 3 minutes, so that's why I was trying to hurry.
In a public hearing, that is absolutely the norm, but here we want to make sure we're having a back and forth. Task force members, we're taking copious notes, but I heard let's make sure we have the data that backs up that we can use prioritization. Let's make sure we're looking at domestic violence. Let's look at the incompatibility or compatibility of data systems. Let's make sure the chief is named the non-voting members to the advisory board. Make sure we're
no, not to the advisory board, to the disciplinary board.
Disciplinary board. And then also looking at off-duty issues of off-duty officers and crimes committed there. Task force members, any questions or follow-up for Elizabeth as you're doing your work?
Just look forward to seeing the letter. I think that, I think I certainly take very seriously what you say, and I don't know your last name, so I would sort of prefer you to do that.
Sorry, I didn't know. I forgot my video. Yeah. Here I am.
Just trying to be respectful. But I think you bring up a really good point about the domestic violence piece, as well as the piece about if there are individuals who should be appointed to the disciplinary board who are members of the public and they haven't been. That's a serious concern. And just speaking for myself, I think those are both excellent points. But I think, hey, I'm a lawyer, and so I think when I have it in writing, then I'll be able to put it down and create something of it. But I think you bring up really good points. Thank you,
Michael.
Yeah, I would just thank you for sharing what you shared. And I just want you to know that one of the things we discussed, I know in our subcommittee, was that, all of the information that was provided to the task force, there should be a way to provide that information to the community, because I think we all need a lot more data. Some of it was easy to get, some of it came to us in a trickle. But my hope is that now that it's been some of it gotten together, and there's probably some requests for some additional data that would be helpful, that we find a follow-up way to make sure that that's out there, because this is not going to be solved in this first iteration. Some of these issues are going to take some period of time and some continued thought and analysis. But thank you, because I agree with much of what you said, and I have brought up domestic violence a few times, and it's been difficult to get information specific to that. So that is something but I think it's really important, and we need to find a way to deal with it. So
yeah, it's not clear in the annual reports or anything whether assault is a domestic violence or something else, and then you can't address those social issues without knowing that data, without that, like you've said before.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. Councilmember, I know you wanted to mention something about the public process going forward.
Sure. Great. Thank you. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your feedback. One of the things that I do want to just make sure folks understand is the overall process that ultimately involves the council. So what you're hearing tonight are draft recommendations.
Yeah, I know.
The team, along with the task force, will work on a final report. And then some of the things that you're asking about, like the rationale and the why and the data, those components may be a part of the final report that will be put together. And then there'll be a series of discussions that will have to happen with the council in terms of how we would go about reviewing the recommendations, as well as any recommendations that would be implemented. So there's going to be far more discussions that are going to happen, and far more opportunities for the community to engage, not just through this process, but also as the council starts to take on review of the recommendations, as well as steps towards implementation. So I just want to make sure that folks have that in mind as well, that this is the first step to many in terms of addressing recommendations that are finalized as part of this effort.
Well, I think it's important. A lot of people mix that word, the police advisory board, with other boards, and it gets all mixed up and the advisory board is not public meeting. It's not recorded. There are very few minutes that are published. I think it's important to take a look at the advisory board meeting, because I was a member of that for 2 years, and see what is the real goal of that, and is it achieving the goals, or can this new committee that you're recommending serve totally to replace that? Because honestly, I never knew why we were there. Okay. And there was no real way to take what we learned there and then disseminate it with the community, except maybe over coffee somewhere, you know? So, yeah, I think there are more effective ways to use a different committee to get what that might have been trying to do, in name anyway. But I do want to say that because of what all I've learned in the last few years, starting with Travis Ayla and his road rage incident, I've then since taken criminal justice classes, mediation classes, 911 call taking, and then criminal justice classes at Montgomery College, so that I could learn more and understand more, so that I wouldn't always poke and say, you're doing everything wrong. They're not doing everything wrong, you know, and we're doing less wrong, I think, than a lot of other places. But if you have officers, and Travis Ayla was not under Duvall, okay, that's a whole other issue. But if none of you know who Travis Ayla is, you just look it up on the internet. It's all over the internet who he is. When you have officers who are doing things like that off duty, they're 5 times more apt to disregard the civil rights of people when they're on duty, according to National Law Enforcement Museum. So you have to pay attention to what they're doing off duty to make sure that it doesn't show up on duty. And that's why I brought that up.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We're going to go to Sue Miller next. And then Elizabeth, if you want to come back, feel free. We're just going to go in the order of who's on our screen. So we're going to go with Sue next. We're going to bring you in, Sue, and you can choose to be on video or not. And we look forward to your thoughts. There you go. Go ahead and come off mute and you're good to go.
Hi, you can hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. First, I want to thank the task force members for the care, time, and effort you've spent on this important task. This is an all-star task force with impressive, wide and deep experience on the matters at hand, and I appreciate that the city and facilitators were able to recruit this group. At the very start, this task force process was sparked by the murder of George Floyd and the protests that followed, including calls for police abolition, for defunding, and for reinvesting those funds in social services. And a number of residents advocated successfully to specifically mention those defund activist groups, including Black Lives Matter and Silver Spring Justice Coalition, in the resolution that created this task force. So I have watched some of the meetings that you've had, and I've read many of the minutes. I know the subcommittee work was not online, but I did note a lot of presentations by police and city staff, and I did not notice any presentations by activist groups, but I may have missed them. So my first question is, did those take place? I saw a recommendation that residents be given better notice when there is an expansion of the police force. But in reading quickly through the recommendations, which I did not see until today, I saw some recommendations for adding other types of staff for social services, but I did not see any mention of any consideration of reduction in the size of the police force other than removing roles like crossing guard and code enforcement and putting them in other departments. So I guess my overall question is whether the task force feels that you were able to have a robust discussion of what would happen if we defunded our police force and relied on the county, or if we halved our force, or if we considerably reduced it. And if I missed that discussion, maybe it was, in a subcommittee, I'd like to know that it occurred, or to have you point the public to the week where it occurred if it was in public. And so I guess I want to hear from the task force members if they felt that the structure of the process, despite a very pressured timeline, allowed for consideration of all of those kinds of options. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Task force? Good, Ajamel.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that you bring up really good points, Miss Miller. I'm gonna draw attention to 3 different things in the recommendations. Number one, it calls for the creation of a neighborhood services team, which will respond to sort of mental health and social services crises. Number 2, it calls for a community service or advocacy or assistance team, which will respond to or deal with all sorts of code violations. Number 3, it calls for the creation of a subset of officers who will not be armed. Those are, although they're not explicit calls for defunding, I think the idea behind all 3 of those was shrinkage of the police department, as well as a growth in other areas. Along with that, we also called for increased funding specifically for certain social service programs, including additional scholarships for job training, as well as after school programs. All of that money will have to come from somewhere. I think your points are really well taken. Perhaps we need to be more explicit about what the consequences of each of those changes are going to be. And I think to the extent that we're not as explicit as we should be, I certainly accept responsibility for that. And I think your point is well taken, and I will be more explicit on that point. But I think that's the intention behind them. I think the other question you raised with regards to whether or not we've been given space to do that is a very important question. And I don't think that my voice alone should necessarily dictate what the dealings have been. But speaking for myself, I think that there have been many leaders in Takoma Park who are open to a transformative view of what policing will look like. That said, I think there are others who've given specific pushback. And I can tell you that, I had other recommendations that were in a previous draft, which included additional cuts to the budget, and there was significant pushback from some leaders in the department. And so I think I'd be happy to sort of talk more offline about the details of that, but hopefully that is clarifying.
Yeah, if I could just respond briefly. That's helpful, but again, what I'm hearing is recommendations for additions and no really clear consideration of how any cuts would occur or why they should occur.
Ms. Miller, can I jump in real quick before I hand it over to Jumana? I think part of what Ajmel was mentioning a lot of was not so much of additions, but more so alternatives, which is what a lot of subcommittees and recommendations kind of focus on. But I'll leave it to the subcommittee and the task force members to kind of give an overview. But Jumana, I see your hand raised.
Hi, Sue. If you need to finish that thought before I respond to what you were saying. Okay, I don't see you coming off. Oh, no, go ahead.
Sorry, you were distorted for me. I'm not sure what you said.
I apologize. I'm also I'm sick a little bit, so I'm not sounding my best, but if you were sort of in the middle of the thoughts, I don't know if there was something else for you to add before I jumped in. I just wanted to make sure that you had completed your thought.
Yes, I think I had.
Okay, so, again, I'm speaking for myself in terms of my experience on the task force. I don't want this to be taken as like obviously representation for the whole task force. But I did want to respond to a couple of things you said. One of them was about sort of like, did we feel like we got access to things we needed in the process? I think you recognized correctly that it's a very compressed timeline. I know, at least for my subcommittee, there was things that we had been asking for that we got very late in the process that made it difficult to incorporate them properly into what we were trying to put together. And, can I tell you why exactly that happened? I don't know. It was useful when we got it, but I know that there was that frustration where it felt like we got things later than we needed them to be able to do the work meaningfully sometimes. At the same time, like I said, this has been sort of not just a compressed process, but one that seemed to be being developed as we went along. When it comes to the question of actual reduction in numbers from the police force, which I feel like you've asked in a couple of different ways, and recommendations, and whether or not there was a question of defunding the police entirely and going with Montgomery County. Again, this is not something that we discussed explicitly. But I'll say two things about it. One, a meeting that's just getting rid of the police department and being under the jurisdiction of Montgomery County. So in our recommendations, so the last one that wasn't spelled out very clearly on our slides, but is spelled out more clearly, is clear communication from the chief in terms of what enforcement looks like in Takoma Park and what Takoma Park Police should be enforcing. And that it should not be minor crimes, misdemeanors, low-level drug offenses, or the things that are not sort of involved with serious crime. That is not an explicit defund request, but in my mind, it is a concentration of policing powers in a way that would dictate what staffing looks like going forward. I also agree with Ajmal in terms of the type of pushback. I know in the evening we were talking about specifically that function. The now outgoing city manager, Susie Ledlow, came back and said that, like, essentially we'd be taking away reasons that people want to do their job. The officers want to come to Takoma Park, and that they'll be reduced to only going to the most awful circumstances, which I found a really interesting reading, because we actually hadn't gone in and said, you can't do National Night Out, or you can't have coffee with a cop, or whatever kind of community engagement gets done. So to me, that response was kind of telling, because I didn't honestly, I don't know if other subcommittees talked about it, but like nowhere in any of the recommendations does it exclude Takoma Park Police Department from any kind of community engagement. It doesn't say they cannot be at like street festivals or anything like that. So I found that a curious response, and I think an indication of viewpoints on this, I would say. But my personal response is whether or not people are looking to defund the police, the question of if we are being patrolled by Takoma Park Police versus Montgomery County Police, I will take Takoma Park Police in a heartbeat. As someone who is raising children, and my biracial, very much Black appearing children in Takoma Park, I have also spent time engaged with Montgomery County PD, and I, not for a second would I want to swap out those two. And that's aside from the question of if you're reducing police or increasing policing. Because I think when you get to the level of the county, if you want to look at the issues there, and I know Elizabeth in the beginning was talking about responding to Takoma Park problems and not like national problems, but I will just say that Montgomery County problems are legion compared to what we're looking at in Takoma Park. Like, these are not the same departments. And I know all I can say is if that was a recommendation coming from the task force, I would have a very vociferous objection to it. I would be a dissenter, I guess.
Thanks, Jumana. Let's see, Michael Rubin, with your hand raised.
Just a very quick comment on this. Thank you, Sue, for bringing this up. I mean, one of the things I was looking at data-wise from the get-go is to try to figure out what the right size for the Takoma Park Police Department is based on what our needs are. In all honesty, I don't really feel like I have enough data or was given enough data to really make a good decision on that. So I think it's something that we need to continue to bring before the council and bring up. It is something we talked about a little bit. We didn't really talk explicitly about full defunding and going to the county. And I understand that. The other thing I would just remind everyone is that we were told several times about there were these American Rescue Plan funds that could allow for pilot projects that could be paid for right now that might give us data that would allow us to right size the police department once we move some of these functions out of the police department. So I think that may be an option, and that's a limited time period funding source that's available for 2 years. So I think that's something we were considering as well, just to mention.
You, Sue?
Yeah, sorry, this will be my last comment. So I just wanted to get clarity on part of my question was, did you hear from, in your formal process, any of the activist groups advocating for reduction or defunding of police? Or because it does feel like this process has been a conversation with city staff. And of course, they're always going to advocate for current city staff and more city staff.
If I could just jump in on that, this is Jimena. No, I will say, if you're asking, like, did we hear specifically from Black Lives Matter or Civil for Justice Coalition or groups like that, the answer is no. We did hear from some outside advocates with expertise that are abolitionists and work in specific areas. I get that is not the same thing, but that is who we heard from. So the direct answer is no, not activist groups, but have we heard from abolitionists who are talking about specific areas of policing? Then the answer is yes. I don't know if that's a distinction without a difference for you, but that is, that's my response.
And Ms. Miller, from a facilitation standpoint, our job in this process has been to try and make sure every voice that needs to be heard in the process is. So all of the subject matter experts, those were not provided by us or by the city. Any subcommittee member who had a subject matter expert or type of expert they wanted to hear from, we tried to bring those folks into the process. And then all of the recommendations, the city has not had any attempt to line edit these. There has been an active back and forth on where does this one come from? Help me with the justification here, but the actual words of the recommendations are the words of the subcommittee members and the task force members, and that will continue all the way through the remainder of the process. So we've worked very hard to make sure that everyone's viewpoint could be heard, including any outside speakers that were asked for. Any additional questions, Ms. Miller?
I'll cede my time. Whoever's next.
Thank you so much. I want to, we don't have anything in the chat box. I see Elizabeth's hands back up, so I will just pause momentarily and see if anyone else wants to jump in. Otherwise, we'll bring Elizabeth back on. Excellent, Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Well, first, I'd like to say I had this boyfriend 30 years ago, and he was in IT, and he would always, when I would complain about something, he would say, well, inspect what you expect, okay? And so I hated him for that. But that's all I have left of that relationship, okay? And so the reason why I thought of that is when we were talking about Montgomery County Police, I think it's important that we inspect what we expect before we ask for it. So my son owns a business in downtown Silver Spring, for example. Go talk to the business owners in downtown Silver Spring. What's their experience with the police? What's their experience with, or talk to the kids that are the skateboarders down there. You know, talk to everybody down there, everybody in that used to be whatever that district was that now the building is gone, and see, well, what's happening? How do you like the way they're acting? Because those are the people probably, or that type that would come to Takoma Park if we then ended up getting rid of Takoma Park. The other possibility is to make Takoma Park building the new down county kind of location, and that you don't fire everybody in Takoma Park, but you merge. I have no idea if that would work, okay? I'm not suggesting it, I'm just saying that we have the building, we have the staff, maybe a merge. And I'm not saying I'm for it or against it, it's just a possibility. But talk about the differences between, because we have a practically totally new force here now. So many new young people, they don't hopefully have a whole lot of bad habits. They just came out of the police academy, but they're still green, you know? So I posted a picture that they were, it was that list of like 6 or 8 new people up on Takoma Park Facebook page. And I said, okay, this is community policing. We're part of the community. Let's start reaching out to these new officers and say hi. Introduce yourselves to the officers. I feel I got more responses that were negative, saying that's not my job to reach out to the police. That's their job to reach out to me. I think that's bullshit, okay? And there's nothing wrong with just when you see an officer, just say hi, you know. I do it, whether they like it or not, because I want to know who's driving around in my neighborhood. And I think if we expect our officers to be acting a certain way and friendly, we have to be the same way to them. So I think that if you agree with that, then some of your community education stuff would be to kind of promote that. You were talking about create community relations, diversity outreach training. Recently, I posted on Takoma Park Facebook that there's something that I've been trying to get done in Takoma Park for years, something called a living library. It started in Denmark years ago, and they usually did it like at festivals and things, where they would have people who would sign up to be a book. So you would check out a person as the book. And so these people that you wanted to know about, maybe it's somebody who's transgender, maybe it's a police officer, maybe it's a fireman, maybe it's somebody who has a weird job, or just or somebody who's marginalized, but you are always afraid to talk to them, or somebody who was an immigrant from a country that you never ever talked to somebody from that country. Those people get trained a little bit to be the book. And then people come in and then they have conversations with all these books. And it would get a really good response on Facebook in Takoma Park. A lot of people wanted to do it. Takoma Radio was interested. And this is just recently, so I haven't set anything up. So I'm just letting you know that feedback-wise, there's an opportunity to do something like that that's like in your plan here, that's already got a good positive response. All right, that's it for now.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Any other comments? Sue, is that a new hand or was that the hand from before? If it's a new hand, we'll bring you back on. I want to make sure if anyone else has a comment too, they're welcome to add it in. Go ahead, Jacqueline, bring Sue back, please. Hey, Sue, welcome back. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make clear that I was not personally advocating for relying on Montgomery County Police in lieu of Takoma Park Police. I was just questioning how broad the task force was considering these questions when they started out. Was that even on the table? Or was it assumed that, you know, we would have a police force? That's all. Just clarifying.
Yep, got it. That is really helpful. I hesitate for us to be part of the answer on this at all, because truly our job is to try and make sure this remains a very open process. We run a lot of community processes, and I can say there was no request that we were asked to get data from the city where they didn't provide it. I also don't think there was any request where the city asked for certain things from the task force where they don't feel that they got it. I feel as a facilitator, the data flow was robust. The timelines never allow for the level of analysis we need. And so that has to be a focus going forward. I'll also note that the task force did extend their work by a month because there was more that needed to be done. And I believe if you polled the group, there'd be some that say this should extend further, and they do other that say we need to bring this part in for a landing so that the city council can take up the next piece. The report will include all of the data and background and SMEs and others that the task force had access to, so that all lives in one place for the ongoing process, understanding that this can't be the end. Perfect. Any other questions or comments with or for Sue? Excellent. Jessica asked, in the interest of transparency, can you allow us to see who is participating? I'm not sure why that function is disabled. My name is Jessica and I live in Ward 1. Thank you for joining, Jessica. The webinar functionality to allow people in and out and make sure we have recordings and transcripts have all been set up this way. Certainly no attempt to hide that. There are currently, There are currently 6 attendees watching. Adam, your hand was up.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to something that Sue had said about our ability to hear from Black Lives Matter and some of these other organizations that might be advocating for defunding or abolishing the police. I think my fellow task force members said accurately that we really didn't have a concrete presentation from those sorts of groups. But my personal sense is that the city council was pretty thoughtful in trying to compose a task force that would represent those sorts of views. And if you look at the bios of some of the people that I have served with, I think you'll find that with the exception of me, they pretty much have those viewpoints covered. And I say that jokingly as someone who comes from government work and might not be disposed to just defunding the police, but when the very first task force meeting happened, I remember going around and much of the focus from a lot of the task force members in their introductions and why they joined was to shrink the impact of the police department and try to move away from traditional armed police responding to things. So I don't want anyone to have the impression that position wasn't represented. I think that it was, and I think that has really kind of permeated a lot of our discussions. The other thing I would just say is that I think I realize you weren't advocating for moving away from necessarily having our own police department and toward us being under Montgomery County, but I would just echo what Jumana and some others have said, which is that I really think that as a town that constitutes, I think, about 1%, maybe 1% of the overall Montgomery County population, we're just not going to get the same level of responsiveness from a county police department, whatever you think of them. And I really do want to acknowledge that even though we had some disagreements about what we were requesting and getting, the city government and the police chief, Chief Duvall in particular, were quite responsive and really, I think, made a sincere effort to get us the information that we needed and to come before us and answer our questions. And I just think that's something that we would be unlikely to hold on to if we did not have our own police department.
Thank you, Adam. Jessica, I see your hand. We're going to go ahead and bring you in. I can see you. Go ahead and come off mute, and video is your choice. Thank you.
Good evening. First, I want to say thank you very much for the work that you all have been putting into this. And I'm really, I'm one of those people who should not be swooping in at the last minute to provide input when I have not been actively participating, but I have been eagerly awaiting your report. My comment has to do with what happens next. Having been active in the budgetary process for Takoma Park for the last couple of years, I worry that the task force is disbanding. You have made a lot of very interesting and eyebrow raising, in a good way, recommendations about resources to be spent that would substitute for traditional policing. And I am worried that I think Sue was trying to make this point, but I won't put words in her mouth. But that when it comes to the budgetary season, and Talisha and the mayor know what I'm talking about here, it's hard to get money redirected. It's one thing to say spend more money on an additional service, but getting funds redirected away from officers on the street and towards social services or psychological services or those other things that we think should complement traditional policing, that's where the rubber meets the road. And our police budget went way up again this year for more officers and expensive vehicles, when maybe what we need is a social worker. And so I'm curious how, and I'm not sure if this is a question for the task force or for the council members who are here, but how will your recommendations translate into budget changes if the task force is disbanded? I mean, in your individual capacities, you could speak, but how do we carry this forward so we don't lose these recommendations when the time comes to spend less money on one thing and more money on another, as opposed to just more money, because there isn't just more money. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Would anyone like to jump in on that? I see Ajamel.
So I share that concern as well. One of the recommendations that my group had was we required or called for or requiring that all recommendations or all efforts to increase funding of the police department going forward be reviewed by a permanent task force, and that recommendations be given by that task force, and those recommendations of the task force with regards to increases in expenditure be publicized going forward. And so I think that was sort of the permanent structural piece that was put into place. I think, and this goes to Ms. Miller's point as well, I think that with regards to those new programs, both the Community Services Division and the Neighborhood Services Division, I think it's explicit in the recommendation is a call that those functions be explicitly removed from supervision of the police department. And so I think the idea behind saying that was to sort of, in effect, shrink the size of the department.
Thank you, Ajamel. Anyone else want to jump in on that? Go ahead, Councilmember Searcy.
Sure. I saw the mayor had came off of mute. I don't know if the mayor wanted to say anything before.
No, you can do it. It's okay.
Okay. First, I just wanted to emphasize that there was a typo in the budget, and so there were not increase in the number of officers in the budget. So I just want to make that point clear. But you do raise a really good point, Jessica, about the steps forward. I think one of the things that in the draft recommendations that are that I really appreciate is that they are novel approaches, right? They're approaches that we have to figure out. And as Michael mentioned earlier, with our ARPA funds, that creates that opportunity for us to pilot approaches, to bring in staff, to try different models, so that when we're at the place where we're having these conversations about budget and reallocations that may be necessary, we're doing and making those decisions from an evidence-based approach. It's kind of hard to make those decisions now without fully understanding what's the appropriate mental health model. How do we look at not just functions of some of the entities within the police department right now under police supervision that may need to be that the task force is recommending be moved to another place, but how does that intersect with staff that are in other offices and their functions? And so how does all of that work together? And so I think one of the things that I do appreciate is the timing of these recommendations, because it'll happen at a time when we should have the recommendations, at a time when we should get some solid answers around the ARPA funds. It gives us the ability to kind of do some model digging and things, and that would happen before we enter into the next budget cycle. And again, I'm thinking fast, but the hope is that we can move fast so that we can start making some inroads to addressing recommendations as the council sees fit. Mm-hmm. And I hear you in terms of, it's sometimes difficult to think through what those reallocations should be, but that's why I think it's really important to take time outside of that budget cycle to kind of try some different models, get some external feedback in terms of approaches that we might be able to take, do some pilots to see what might work. And then that makes the decision-making during budget season a lot easier.
Thank you, Councilmember.
I was just gonna add, this is the other reason this is coming at a great opportunity for us is because we do have a new city manager coming on August 2nd. And, I think having fresh eyes to look at our departments, look at, how we're functioning is a great chance to take these recommendations, particularly some of the ones regarding departments and other things, and setting up structures, looking at our budget. I think this is a great chance for Mr. Fox coming in to have these recommendations. And I'll also say that, a number of them are things that the city council itself has been talking about and raising. So I think some of them are brand new, but there's definitely overlap, like neighborhood services and other things that we've been raising on the city council, and having the task force come back with recommendations that reinforce what a lot of us have been thinking about, is also really helpful in talking to our colleagues on the city council, and also, really moving forward to making some of these changes. I think there's a lot of opportunities here. And the last thing I'll just say is, like Michael said, the ARPA funds provide us an opportunity to try some pilot projects, and maybe put things in place that then we can leverage and look for grant money in the future. We're also in the best place we've ever been with tax duplication, and with the county looking at the rebate formulas for our police department. So all these conversations are kind of happening all at once, which can seem overwhelming and seem like, okay, where are we going? But I think actually having all these conversations happening at once really helps us to see where the opportunities are and the openings for us in Takoma Park to lead on some of these issues and really make the transformation we want in our own community.
Thank you, Mayor. I know we're reaching top of the hour, but this is your time, so we want to make sure we're getting everything in. Any attendees that we haven't gotten to yet? Any chat? And then I'm going to turn it over to you, to Jamal, to close us out in just a second. I see Elizabeth has a hand up. Elizabeth? Welcome back, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Haven't seen me so much in a long time, have you, Kate? She used to see me in front of the city council meeting a lot. But anyway, regarding the code enforcement, I do agree that it should come back out of the police department. But I do want to remind that sometimes when you do code enforcement, you do need police backup. So it's not, they're still going to have to work together. You know, I've seen a circumstance that it was really important to have police officer there to maintain a sense of calm over a situation. That's number one, without getting into the details of it. Number two, I talked to a few friends of mine who are psychologists, not social workers, and said, well, you know, would you take a job like that? You know, do the night shift at the police department for, you know, he's like, no, I didn't pay that much money to go to school to get my degree. And I want to sit in my office and work 9 to 5. So I don't know how difficult it will be to get the kind of people you want for 24/7 availability. I don't know, but it's something to think about. And also, they will have paid a lot of money to go to college, whereas the police officers may have just come out of associate degree or maybe even high school. I don't know. Then they're hired, and then they go to the police academy. So they've got. I assume they're hired, and so they're getting a salary. That's very different from somebody who's invested a lot of money in their education. And so you're probably going to have to start the social workers out at a higher income level, I think, than the police. But I don't know. But so it won't be necessarily an equal trade off in that position. And the last thing I would like to suggest is anybody, this is kind of maybe outside the scope of what you're doing, but anybody who applies to be a city council member or mayor should have on their resume that they've taken the civilian police academy before they start campaigning. I think it's really important to really understand what the police department is about. I have no idea if Kate has taken it or not. I wasn't pointing at you, but I do know. Yeah,
I've been right along. I've taken it.
Yeah, before or after you ran for mayor, I don't know, but I know there's a couple city council members who haven't, and so I think it's really important to understand that part of our community before you run. Anyway, thanks. You can add that to your recommendations.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. Excellent. I think we've gotten through the questions. I don't see any more hands up. I don't see anything else in the chat or the Q&A. So I'm going to turn this over to Jamal.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. And really thank you to the community members who came to provide some comments, feedback, and we'll take all of the feedback we heard tonight and debrief as a task force tomorrow and start moving towards the final stage of building out the recommendations. Before we fully close, I'd like to turn it over to Madam Mayor Stewart to give us a few words before we close out tonight and move forward with building out this report. So, Madam Mayor.
Great. Thanks, Jamal. Well, I said a lot of what I was thinking of saying at the end before, but I do just want to extend my thanks to everybody on the task force for all your work on this, as well as members of the public who were able to ask questions tonight, have sent in comments, and even folks who are at home watching or may watch the recording of this later. And so, I think we have, as I said before, a great deal of work ahead of us. You all have done an enormous amount of work, and we just really, really appreciate it and look forward, whether or not it is in the form of a formal standing committee or individually working with all of you in the future. So I just want to say thank you so much for everything that you've done. And I just another reminder is that we do talk a lot about the police department, but our task was really to look broadly at reimagining public safety in the community. And this isn't a comment to the task force, but to all of us, is I think we have to remind ourselves that we're also like looking also broadly at a whole bunch of issues. And I appreciate that a number of the recommendations do that. So thank you to the task force for also broadening it out, because I know sometimes the police department stuff can take up a huge amount of the conversation. So thank you, everyone, and I look forward to the final report.
Awesome. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So that's all we have for tonight. So again, thank you all. We encourage you all to continue to engage and be on the lookout for a final report. And again, as mentioned, we'll take the feedback we heard tonight and find ways to incorporate that into the final report as we debrief as a task force tomorrow. So I'll give folks 3 minutes back of their Monday. So enjoy the rest of your Monday.